Hello and welcome to the webcast for Their Eyes Were Watching God, a great book which we discussed at Emily's Walking Book Club last weekend. I chose it in part to diversify our reading lists in the wake of Black Lives Matter. Also, it tied in really well with October being Black History Month. It's also a book I've been meaning to read for a very long time. It's been recommended to me by several people, so I was really glad of the chance to get stuck into it. Obviously, in our discussion, we talked about quite a few things. I'm going to focus just on three main points today. So the first thing to say is, what's this book about? It's about Janie, who we first meet when she's coming back from some kind of a journey. And then we hear about her life starting from she's a teenager, going up to the sort of point that we first met her, if you see what I mean, when I think she's about 40. In this time, she gets through three different men, three different husbands, in fact, but really it's a story of self-knowledge, a kind of journey to self-awareness and a journey into womanhood. The first thing I'd really like to talk about is, it comes up straight away at the beginning. It's quite a sort of hard thing to describe, but perhaps it's best put as being the idea that the bodies are vessels for all sorts of changeable things inside, and this kind of difference and disparity between the outside of someone and the inside. So this is on page 1, and it's when Janie's coming back to the town that she's left on her journey. She's coming back. It says, the people all saw her come because it was sundown. The sun was gone, but he'd left his footprints in the sky. It was the time for sitting on porches beside the road. It was the time to hear things and talk. These sitters had been tongueless, earless, eyeless conveniences all day long. Mules and other brutes had occupied their skins. But now, the sun and the bossman were gone, so the skins felt powerful and human. They became lords of sounds and lesser things. They passed nations through their mouths. They sat in judgment. So this idea that the skins have been occupied first of all by mules and other brutes and then become powerful and human, lords of sounds. I thought that was a really fascinating idea, and I think it's picked up on again when we hear about Janie first discovering that she is black. She says she didn't realise it until she was age 6, and she sees a photo of herself and doesn't recognise the little black girl in it as being her. And this led us on to a really good talk about the psychoanalyst Lacan, who had this theory of the mirror stage, which is when a baby is about 6 months old, they look in a mirror and see themselves, and instead of just seeing a baby, which up until that point they've just thought, oh, here's another baby, they suddenly say, oh, that baby is me. And it's at once a sort of moment of self-recognition, but also a very jarring moment, because they think, oh my goodness, how can that be me when here's my hand, here's my leg, this sort of mess of a body is somehow brought into this whole thing over there. So there's a kind of jarring with that. And I think generally in literature, whenever there's this moment, a kind of mirror moment, a moment of recognising yourself, it's really fascinating. There's a really good one in Frankenstein when the monster looks into the lake and sees his reflection. There's also a great one in Stefan Zweig's The Post Office Girl. In fact, there are two good ones in there, which we discussed at the book club a couple of years ago. So we talked about that. Oh, and then the final thing of this inside and outside, which was really haunting, it's on page 82. It's when she's talking about her second marriage, unhappy, to Jody, and he's just hit her. And Janie says, what did she say? She says she found that she had a host of thoughts that she'd never expressed to him, and numerous emotions she had never let Jody know about. Things packed up and put away in parts of her heart where he could never find them. She was saving up feelings for some man she'd never seen. She had an inside and an outside now, and suddenly she knew how not to mix them. So we talked a bit about that feeling of having a facade, that sometimes it can be quite empowering, like when we're going to work and we want to put on a very professional front. But sometimes it can also be very lonely making and isolating, feeling that everybody sees you as one thing, but actually inside you're quite different. And I think that's particularly the case, obviously in a marriage, feeling that your inside is unknown by your husband. But maybe it's also powerful. So we talked about that, and then of course we talked about slavery, both ways in which slavery is still something that happens, institutionalized racism as being a kind of legacy of slavery, and slavery in the book as how it affects Janey, really. So we learn that her nanny, who's brought her up, her granny, who she calls Nanny, was born in slavery times. And what's very interesting is that Janey says at some point that her grandmother had been so fixated on Janey being able to get to the point where she could sit on a chair on a porch, and that's what she really wanted for her. And Janey's now got there, and she doesn't know what to do next. She says it was boring. I'm going to find the page so I can read a tiny bit out for you. Sorry, here we go. So she says, she says they're sitting on porches like the white madam looked like a mighty thing to her. That's what she wanted for me. And then it says, the object was to get there, so I got up on the high stool like she told me. But, she says, I nearly languished to death up there. And this led to a great discussion about the difficulty in knowing what to do next. If your life is spent fighting a particular regime or system or circumstance, once you've broken through and got there, then what do you do? And one walker talked a bit about the ANC in South Africa and how when they came into power, they were criticised for not really making that many changes and just sort of sitting there for a while, because so much energy had gone into just getting into power. Once you had the power, what do you do with it? And in a way, I think that's what we see with Jody, who gets into a position of power. He goes to this town and starts everything out. He makes a store, he puts a light in the road, but he's compared to slave owners, both when he's getting everyone to dig the ditch or dig the hole for the lamp, I can't remember what it was, and then really brilliantly when he frees a mule, this sort of knackered old mule that he buys off someone for $5, and the person who sells it to him says, I've totally screwed you, you'll never get any work out of this mule. And he says, no, I didn't buy it to work it, I bought it to free it. And Janey talks about how it's such a clever thing to do, and it's made him so powerful to show that he's in a position to offer freedom to something. And I think she compares him to the president freeing the Negroes. So I suppose, why isn't Jody a more sympathetic character? Why isn't he a great black leader? Instead, we don't particularly like him. He's quite horrid and controlling to Janey, and he kind of inhabits this role that he's kind of overturned because he's not white, but he hasn't created a new system. He's just got to where the white person was, to some extent. Obviously he's not, nobody's actually enslaved to him. They have the choice to be there, but there were real parallels. And then the last thing we talked about was the way in which it was written. A few readers did struggle with it being written in dialect quite heavily, and that interspersed with these intense poetic images. but most of us loved it and found it very absorbing. And we thought that writing it in dialect like that, it really makes you listen to the words. It kind of takes you there. And because a word that is so familiar to you is made slightly different by being written so phonetically, and the sounds being slightly different to how you would pronounce it, it's kind of both disorienting and I suppose orienting. It kind of takes you to this other place, and we thought that was great. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for those of you who came. There are now going to be a few clips of the walk. So here we are on the walk, gathering at one of the stops. I'm so sorry, you can see my red pen in the corner. Whoops. You can't really see here, but it was a beautiful day. And here we are at the end, tired, happy. We had such a good discussion of this book, and it was a really great Sunday morning walk.
Okay,
See you next time.
Can we...